Hi guys, welcome back. Um, I want to go back a little bit, and we're gonna go through another section of Ishmael Bear's story, Unusual Normality. Um, as you can tell from the recording, we went back a little bit to kind of remind you of what was going on, and we are discussing his uh, his relationship with the other students that he was going to school with, and um, kind of the other things that are being discussed or being set aside as being important. So let's just look at paragraph 31 here. But I needed to be silent about my background because I also felt like I was being watched. When I got into the school, some of the other parents were not very happy that somebody with my background was in school with their children, and I realized that the way I conducted myself would determine whether they would even let another child who had been through war into such a school. So if we look at this paragraph, right, we know that prior to this, we had a lot of positive tone, a lot of showing his personality with the laughter and making fun of things, right? So in this case, I'm looking at, but I needed to be silent. So I would highlight this, right, if I was going to be annotating. And of course, I always want to add a note. So I put a note, needed is a strong word to use, just to kind of emphasize why I'm highlighting that particular sentence there, right? And then I also wanted to underline, I was being watched. I feel like this is also a note that I would want to add. I was being watched, uh, kind of creepy, um, is what I would get from it. But it could be anything else. And then, as we keep going, some of the parents were not very happy. So now we're showing other people's reactions or feelings, right? We want to make sure to acknowledge how other people are reacting to his presence, right? So as we see these things here, I want to think about what do I notice about these words, these phrases that is different than the tone that has been set in the rest of the story so far. And I would say that this is definitely a tone shift. We've talked about tone shift and how it's important, right? Because our author usually wants to say something about whatever he's shifting, right? So he's had a very positive tone thus far, and then we get to this paragraph and we have needed to be silent. I was being watched. We're not very happy, and I feel like this is a huge tone shift, right? I would say this is very serious. Okay, and so why would an author add a tone shift from like positive for so many paragraphs to add in then this negativity? And I think it's, for me anyway, I would say that the tone shift is there to remind us of the seriousness of this personal essay of his. Like, this is his life and what he had to go through, and he did have some backlash, right, from just existing and being who he is. So keep that in mind when we're looking at tone and tone shift in any kind of a story. What is the shift actually saying, right? Okay, so we're going to keep going. And we're going to move on to this next paragraph in 32. But even with all these attitudes and with my silence, I started making friends. So right away, I decide I'm going to underline but, or I'm going to underline the word but, right? Because to me, this is kind of leading us toward another positive tone. Um, another tone of positivity. Positivity, right? And when we have positive tones, right, we see a pattern happening. throughout his essay so far, right? We've got all of this positive happening with the laughter and his losing his luggage and having to write that essay about why he doesn't have a report card, right? And he's kind of a little sarcastic in there, right? Because why does a principal need to have a report card? It just seems kind of weird, right? And then we have that moment of negativity in this paragraph right here. And then we go back to, but even with all these attitudes and with my silence, I started making friends. So I feel like he is now saying, like, overall, this is a positive essay. And we don't need to focus on the negativity or the seriousness. We just need to be aware of it, right? And so sometimes when we think about tone and what is important, I think we forget that sometimes we just being aware of the different tones or any of underlying tones that may be within the text are just as important as those that are being brought to the surface. All right, so as we keep going, right, he talks about how his new friends were saying that they were tough and that they were going to show him how to be tough, right? Because apparently they've been to the Bronx and they've been to Bed-Stuy. They live in New York, right? New York is this tough city, right? He's got tough city right here. And then we have a whole bunch of dialogue that's happening, right? Like, if you want to survive in the streets of New York City, we need to teach you a few things. And he's always, and I'd be like, okay, sure, I'm open to learning. And they tell me things about how to be tough and stuff. And I would say, well, thank you very much. I truly appreciate this advice that you're giving me. They were like, no worries. Anytime, anytime. So really, this dialogue is happening, and it's very positive, right? He is responding in a very positive, but his friends, his teenage friends, right, high schoolers, have a specific thought about him, and he's just trying to be nice, essentially, right? So what thought, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it, but what thought do you think that his friends have about him, and then why? Okay, so I would say that the thought that his friends have about him is that he's new to America, new to New York, and of course, because they don't really know anything about him, right? They make those assumptions, which he doesn't deny here in paragraph 30, right? I did not dispute the fact that I was from some royal African family or that I was a prince, because you see, sometimes some stereotypes have their benefits, and I certainly took advantage of that. So while they thought that he was this man who was coming from high society or who never really experienced life, he just kind of went along with it, right? He was amenable, which basically just means agreed with, right? With them allowing them to like show off for him and make them feel like they're actually teaching him something that he would have never known before. And so my question for you here is, how does the dialogue contribute to the story? So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about that. Think about the dialogue and what it's happening, and then just tell me, like, how do you think it contributes to the story? All right, so I would say, and if you are on point with me, then you are good to go. I would say that the dialogue contributes to the story because it kind of gives us this picture of how everyone sees him and how he is just so willing to allow them to teach him things. It still kind of shows that he's not willing to share too much because maybe he doesn't really think they're ready for it, right? He states that earlier, when, see if I can find it. Yeah. So he states that earlier, right? Like, he doesn't know what to tell them because I felt that they were not ready to hear the truth, right? So keep in mind that he has these thoughts in his head and these secrets that he's keeping for himself. And so these are the other people's thoughts about him. It tells a lot about them as characters. It tells a lot about him as a character. And then overall, it does tell us a lot about what he's going through in the story. All right, so if we look at paragraph 41, right, when I walked with them, I observed that I paid more attention to the people who walked past us, how the person walked, which way they were coming from. I didn't take the same route twice because I didn't want to develop a predictable path. These were all habits that were formed from my experiences, but I noticed that my new friends didn't do that at all. So I knew they were just saying these things to seem tough to me. So what do his actions tell us about him? So the fact that he, observed how people walked when they walked past him, um, that he never took the same route twice, right? He didn't want to develop a predictable path. I'm going to give you a few seconds. I want you to think about, what does that say about him? So it basically, it's showing, he says, right, these were habits that were formed from my experiences. Remember, he was a child of war. He was in the war or in the army in Sierra Leone. So he had to learn all of these things, right? So he's always aware of his surroundings so that he doesn't get caught up in it. This is an inference, right? We're assuming this based on this information that is on here, based on what we've read prior from his background in the earlier paragraphs. Um, so we are stopping today with paragraph 42, right? This last paragraph here kind of just shows how much he is willing to just listen to his friends and let them pretend to be tough for him, because they don't really know who he is, and if they did, who knows what they would think. So I want to ask you guys, according to Bea, so the author, what do you think he thinks of his new friends? And as stated earlier, I would say that they are not as tough as they want to seem, because if they were tough, you wouldn't really brag about your toughness. If you actually were tough, you wouldn't need to. You know it, and you don't have to show it unless it has to come up, right? So when we think about tone and we think about word choice and where things are in the text, right, we want to think about all of those things to kind of come up with one idea, like author's purpose, right? And so in this case, because he is talking about incidents that are happening in his life, right? And we're going to keep going, and there's going to be more. I'm not even going to tell you what the author's purpose is or author's intent. I'm going to let you figure it out, and we're going to get back to this and answer that question, hopefully next week, and then we'll see where we are from there. So now you're going to have an independent practice. You're going to read the chapter Those Who Don't from House on Mango Street, and you're going to answer the question. So hopefully what we went through today is going to help you with that, and I look forward to seeing your answers.